We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we are continuing our look into the book Human Origins. We are looking at the Taung infant skull. In 1985, January, they celebrated the Diamond Jubilee of the find of the Taung infant skull by Raymond in 1925. It is appropriate that they should have paid tribute to Raymond. Dart was the man who first recognised the little skull that came from a limestone quarry in South Africa, figure 2.2. At first glance, it appears to have many ape-like features, such as a protruding jaw. However, it has a rather bulging forehead, and the size of its brain, is judged by an endocast of rock, which was inside, is larger than it should be for a creature of that age if it were simply a kind of chimpanzee. The teeth also show some extremely interesting details, although these were not at first recognised by Dart because they were, here's figure 2, the Taung infant skull, right lateral view, photograph A.R. Hughes. They were all obscured by a matrix. When Dart brought the Taung skull to London, the anatomical establishment was highly sceptical. Grafton, Elliot, Smith and others simply dismissed it because it was juvenile, it was incomplete, and there was insufficient evidence to suggest that it was a hominid or man-like creature. It was some years before confirmation came in the form of new finds from other sites. For example, Robert Broom discovered a skull in the limestone cave of Sterkfontein in South Africa. Limestone caves commonly form when water percolates through the ground and then the resulting caverns open to the outside. Animals may find their way into such caves and die and become incorporated in the material or breccia that accumulates on their floors. The Sterkfontein skull, when it was removed and cleaned, proved to be extremely interesting. The upper jaw was projecting or prognathic, but the skull was very rounded, and the plane at the back of the neck to which the neck muscles were attached was arranged in such a way that the balance point was well forward. This indirect evidence indicates that the poise of the head was such that the animal spent a good deal of its time upright on 2 feet. A little later, pelvic evidence confirmed that the Australopithecines, as Dart called them, walked in a way more similar to modern humans than to modern monkeys and apes. So now it was quite clear that Dart's Taung find was not a freak, it had to be explained. A second group of Australopithecines come from Swartkrans and Kromdraai, and these are much more robust creatures. The teeth are very big. In order to make large teeth work properly, you must have big muscles. In order to make large teeth work properly, you must have big muscles. If you are unfortunate enough not to have a very large brain, you don't have a very big brain case, therefore you don't have very much room on which to hang those big muscles. Thus it is necessary to make use of bony crests, and that is why creatures like gorillas and chimpanzees have crests on top of their heads. Some hominids have crests on top of their heads and also extremely heavy facial buttressing to dissipate the forces of chewing through the face to the cranium. In the robust Australopithecines, there is an extraordinary size ratio between the small teeth at the front and the large teeth at the back. The teeth at the front, the incisors and canines, are extremely small. Behind them are 2 premolars, and then behind them are the molars, and these are veritable millstones. They are enormous crushing and grinding teeth. Modern techniques have been used on these specimens. In particular, scanning electron microscopy has told us a great deal about the way in which these teeth were used by revealing their weird patterns, etc., etc. And at the upper end of the Rift Valley in the region of the Haida Triangle in Ethiopia, the American paleoanthropologist Donald Johanson and his team, as well as some French workers, have been recovering some extraordinary hominids fossils in recent years. The most spectacular of all these finds is the famous Lucy, which until recently was the most complete skeleton of a fossil hominid anywhere in the world. Lucy is remarkable in many ways. She is a partial skeleton, including representatives of almost all of the limb bones. We have a shoulder joint, an elbow, a wrist, a hip joint, a knee joint, an ankle joint, and also part of the pelvis, dated at about 3 million years before present BP. Lucy undoubtedly stood upright, walked and ran about. We have some hands and toe bones, and at the moment there is a debate, or at that moment, There was a debate about whether or not some of the features of these bones disclose more of an ability to climb trees than other later fossil hominids. The question is, did Lucy actually live in trees, or are her arboreal features the vestiges of an ancestor which had rather more arboreal adaptations than she did? And so forth. Okay, it's about that with those two. Well, we have looked into it, and we found information on the Taung Child. The Taung Child, or Taung baby, is a fossilized skull of a young Australopithecus africanus. It was discovered in 1924 by quarrymen working for the Northern Lime Company in Taung, South Africa. Raymond described it as a new species in the journal Nature in 1925. The Taung skull is in repository at the University of Witwatersrand, wherever that is. Johannesburg, South Africa. Dean Falk, a specialist in brain evolution, has called it the most important anthropological fossil of the 20th century. It's the history, background. In the early 20th century, the workers at limestone quarries in southern Africa routinely uncovered fossils from the Tufa Formation that they mined. The Tufa did not form consistently, and over time cavities were left open and they became beneficial areas for animals to take shelter in. As a result, many bones began to build up in these areas. These areas were mostly sandstone, and they stood in the way of successful mining, so miners would use explosives to clear these areas and discard all the debris. However, many fossils began to show up, and they were saved by many of the miners. Many were of extinct fauna, which include baboons and other primates, and the more complete or somehow more interesting fossils were kept as curiosities by the Europeans who managed operations. Discovery in 1924, workers at the Buxton Limeworks near Taung showed a fossilized primate skull to E.G. Izod. The visiting director of the Northern Lime Company, the managing company of the quarry. The director gave it to his son, Pat Izod, who displayed it on the mantle over the fireplace. When Josephine Salmons, a friend of the Izod family, paid a visit to Pat's home, she noticed the primate skull, identified it as from an extinct monkey, and realised its possible significance to her mentor, Raymond. Salmons was the first female student of Dart and anatomist at the University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, South Africa. Salmons was permitted to take the fossilised skull and presented it to Dart, who also recognised it as a significant find. Dart asked the company to send any more interesting fossilised skulls that were unearthed. When a consulting geologist, Robert Young, paid a visit to the quarry office, the director, A.E. Spears, presented him with a collection of fossilised primate skulls that had been gathered by a miner, Mr. D. Brune. A.E. Spears was using a particular fossil as a paperweight, and Young asked him for this as well. Young sent some of the skulls back to Dart. When Dart examined the contents of the crate, he found a fossilised endocast, of a skull showing the impression of a complex brain. He quickly searched through the rest of the fossils in the crates and matched it to a fossilised skull of a juvenile primate, which had a shallow face and fairly small teeth. Only 40 days after he first saw the fossil, Dart completed a paper that named the species of Australopithecus africanus. The southern ape from Africa, and described it as an extinct race of apes intermediate between living anthropoids and man. The paper appeared in the 7th February 1925 issue of the journal Nature. The fossil was soon nicknamed the Taung Child. Initial criticism of Dart's claims. Reception. Scientists were initially reluctant to accept that the Taung Child, a new genus Australopithecus, were ancestral to modern humans. In the issue of Nature immediately following the one in which Dart's papers was published, several authorities in British paleoanthropology, criticised Dart's conclusion. 3 of the 4 scholars were members of the Piltdown Man Committee. It was a fraud, paleoanthropological fraud, in which the bone fragments were presented as the fossilized remains of a previously unknown early human. Although there were doubts about its authenticity reached from the beginning, they believed that it was the real deal, by the sounds of it. This committee was Sir Arthur Keith, Grafton Elliott Smith, and Sir Arthur Smith. Sir Arthur Smith Woodward, he wasn't related to. He wasn't related to Henry Woodward. They were much more sceptical about this fossil's place in evolutionary history, and believed it deserved to be categorised as a chimp or gorilla rather than human ancestor. However, Dart still had the hesitant support of W.L.H. Duckworth, but he still asked for more information on the brain to support this claim. Dart's former mentor, Arthur Keith, one of the most prominent anatomists of his time, claimed that there was insufficient evidence to accept Dart's claims that Australopithecus was transitional between apes and humans. What they're saying is that this ape slowly transitioned into a human. Grafton Elliott Smith stated that he needed more evidence and a large picture of the skull before he could judge the significance of the new fossil. Arthur Smith Woodward dismissed the Taung Child as having little bearing on the issue of whether the direct ancestors of man are to be sought in Asia or Africa. The critiques became more fervent. A few months later, Elliott Smith concluded that the Taung fossil was essentially identical to the skull of the infant gorilla and chimpanzee. Infant apes appear more human-like because of the shape of their forehead and the lack of fully developed brow ridges. Addressing the claim that the fossil was a missing link between ape and man, Arthur Keith stated in a letter to the Nature magazine that an examination of the cast will satisfy geologists that this claim is preposterous. The skull is that of a young anthropoid ape, and showed so many points of affinity with the 2 living African anthropoids, the gorilla and chimpanzee, that there cannot be a moment's hesitation in placing the fossil form in this living group, in the ape group. In 1926, a year after the publication of Dart's article, Alice Hedrika, not too sure you say that, Alice Hedrika, I guess it's L.O.A. Ferdinand, something like that, changed his name to that. Okay, Czech anthropologist who lived in the United States after his family had moved there in 1881. He was born in Humpolic, Bohemia. That's where he was born in Humpolic, Bohemia. So he was a Bohemian. This guy personally commented on another of Dart's articles, this time in Natural History, saying that the author very ingeniously, but it seems obvious, more or less artificially, endeavours to humanise the Australopithecus. It is not known that this effort thus far has found favour with any other student who gave truly earnest and critical attention to the otherwise very interesting and important Taung relic. Reasons for dissent. There are several reasons that it took decades for the field to accept Dart's claim that Australopithecus africanus was in the human line of descent. First and foremost was the fact that the British scientific establishment had been fooled by the hoax of the Piltdown Man, which had a large brain and ape-like teeth. Expecting human ancestors to have evolved a large brain very early, they found that the Taung Child's small brain and human-like teeth made it an unlikely ancestor to modern humans. Secondly, until the 1940s, most anthropologists believed that humans had evolved in Asia, not in Africa. A third reason is that despite accepting that modern humans had emerged by evolution, many anthropologists believed that the genus Homo had split from the great apes as long as 30 million years ago, and so felt uneasy about accepting that humans had a small brain ape-like ancestor like Australopithecus africanus only 2 million years ago. Lastly, many people disputed the role of this fossil because of their religious affiliation. When Taung was first announced in February 1925, many anti-evolutionists began to rise up in protest of this fossil. Dart began receiving many threats from members of various religious communities that proclaimed his idea blasphemous. So was it just verbal threats, or was it potentially dangerous physical threats? Some were able to reconcile the science with the religious theology through the lens of creation science, but there was still significant opposition. However, by this time many other fossils such as Java man, Neanderthal man and Rhodesian man. What's Java man? You found Indonesia somewhere? Okay, it's supposed to be between 700,000 and 2,000, is it 2 million years old. It was at the time of its discovery the oldest hominoid fossils ever found, etc. And you had the Neanderthal man, also written as Neanderthals, are an extinct species or a subspecies of archaic humans who lived in Eurasia until about 40,000 years ago. The reasons for Neanderthal extinction are disputed, and there's theories for their extinction. And Rhodesian man, Homo rhodesiensis, is a species name proposed by Arthur Smith Woodward, 1921, to classify Kabwe, a Middle Stone Age fossil recovered from Broken Hill Mine in Kabwe, northern Rhodesia. In 2020, the skull was dated to 324,000 to 274,000 years ago. Okay. They were being discovered, and the theory of evolution was becoming more difficult to refute or to debunk, denounce. Solly Zuckerman, also known as Solomon Solly Zuckerman, Baron Zuckerman, was a British public servant, a zoologist and operational research pioneer. He is best remembered as a scientific advisor to the Allies on bombing strategy in the Second World War. He studied anatomy under Dart in South Africa and concluded as early as 1928 that Australopithecus was little more than an ape. He and a four-member team carried out further studies of the Australopithecine family in the 1940s and 50s, using a metrical and statistical approach that he thought was superior to purely descriptive methods. He decided that the creatures had not walked on two legs and were not an intermediate form between humans and apes. For the rest of his life, Zuckerman continued to deny that Australopithecus was part of the human family, even when that was a conclusion that had become universally, globally or worldly accepted by scientists. Acceptance. Dart's claims that Australopithecus africanus was the species name that he given to the Taung Child was a transitional form between apes and humans was almost universally rejected. Robert Broom, a Scottish doctor who worked in South Africa, was one of the few scientists to believe Dart. 2 weeks after Dart announced the discovery of the Taung Child in nature, Broom visited Dart in Johannesburg to see the fossil. After he became a paleontologist in 1933, Broom found adult fossils of Australopithecus africanus and discovered more robust fossils, which were eventually renamed Australopithecus robustus, aka Paranthropus robustus. Even after Dart chose to take a break from his work in anthropology, Broom undertook more excavations and slowly began to find more Australopithecus africanus specimens that proved Dart was correct in his analysis of the Taung Child. It did have human-like morphology. In 1946, Broom and his colleague Gerrit Schippers published a volume consolidating all the information they had found about the Australopithecus africanus in a volume titled The South African Fossil Men, the Australopithecini, and so forth. And someone else accepted it. He supported Charles Darwin and Thomas Henry Huxley's then unpopular view that humans were closely related to African apes. The director of the museum, however, was Henry Fairfield Osborn, despite being the chief public defender of evolution in the United States at the time of the Scopes trial in 1925. He disagreed with Darwin's views on the origins of humanity. Gregory and Osborne repeatedly debated the issue in public forums, but Osborne's views that humans had evolved from early ancestors who did not look like apes prevailed among American anthropologists in the 1930s and 1940s. In 1938, Gregory visited South Africa and saw the Taung Child, and the fossils that Broom had recently discovered. More convinced than ever that Dart and Broom were right, he called Australopithecus africanus the missing link, no longer missing. The turning point in the acceptance of Dart's analysis of the Taung Child came in 1947, when a prominent British anthropologist, Wilfred Le Gros Clark, announced that he supported it. Le Gros Clark, who would also play an important role in exposing the fraud of the Piltdown Man in 1953, visited Johannesburg in late 1946 to study Dart's Taung skull and Broom's adult fossils with the intention of proving that they were only apes. After 2 weeks of studies and visiting the caves in which Broom had found his fossils, the Taung cave had been destroyed by miners soon after the discovery of the Taung skull. However, Clark became convinced that these fossils were hominids rather than pongans. In 1947, Sir Arthur Keith published in Nature announcing his support of Dart and Broom's research. He stated the evidence submitted by Dr. Robert Broom and Professor Dart was right and I was wrong, agreeing that with the new evidence along with the Taung fossil indicated that this fossil was human-like in posture, dental elements and its bipedal walk. So he changed his mind. He changed his mind.